After we do exercise, we then need to recover from that exercise. So these replenishing steps that require extra oxygen are referred to as excess post exercise oxygen consumption, or EPOC. It was formerly referred to as oxygen debt, but now we use this term, EPOC, or excess post exercise oxygen consumption. So, ways that the muscle can return to its pre exercise state is oxygen reserves are replenished. This would just include things like gasping for oxygen, for more air. Doesn't even have to be gasping. It's going to be just the natural inhalation of the oxygen traveling deep into the lungs. The lactic acid can be reconverted into pyruvic acid. This can happen in the liver. Glycogen stores can be replenished. So, one way athletes sometimes do this will be to load up on polysaccharides like pasta, for example. Also, the ATP and the creatine phosphate reserves are resynthesized. So, factors that affect muscle contraction are shown on this slide. It depends on the number of cross bridges that are attached. So the first of which is the high frequency of stimulation. Remember, that is called temporal summation or tetanus. So that's the frequency of stimulation where we increase frequency, thus increasing force. The second factor is a large number of muscle fibers that are recruited. So the more motor units recruited, the greater the force. The third factor is large muscle fibers, and that means that the bulkier the muscle, the more tension can develop. So muscle cells can increase in size, and we call that hypertrophy. The last factor is that the muscle and sarcomere can be stretched to slightly over 100% of resting length, which we'll see on the next slide. So the degree of muscle stretch, kind of the sweet spot for sarcomeres, is between 80 and 120%. That's called the optimal sarcomere operating length. So this length tension relationship of sarcomeres is shown on this slide. Here we can see that the sarcomeres are greatly shortened, and in this case, the actin is majorly overlapping the myosin. And it's doing this to the point where really no more cross bridges can form. So the 80 to 120%, that is the optimal length, because you can see that it's at the point at where all the cross bridges form. But then if it's excessively stretched, it's also suboptimal, like 75%, because as you can see, there's no more cross bridges that can form at this point. So you should know that number of between 80 and 120%. The velocity and duration of contraction is going to be classified according to really two characteristics: the speed of contraction, so this would be slow or fast fibers that I've mentioned earlier. So it's the speed at which the myosin ATPases can split the ATP. It's classified according to the metabolic pathway, so it's either oxidative or glycolytic. And oxidative would use the aerobic pathways, which, remember, produces 32 ATP, and glycolytic is using the anaerobic glycolysis, which only produces 2 ATP. So these two criteria we classify into technically three types, but there's only two that you need to know: the slow oxidative fiber and the fast glycolytic fibers. And we're going to see those coming up on the next table. So I'm going to cross off this middle one because you're not responsible for it. So most muscles are going to contain a mixture of fiber types. So all fibers in one motor unit are going to have the same type, and the genetics dictate this. You can actually go to a lab and they can do a biopsy of your muscle and then tell you what percentage of slow oxidative fibers you have compared to fast glycolytic fibers. Also, the genetics are obviously very important. So, I obviously have um, muscles that are different than LeBron James, for example, or any of the NBA stars that you think of. No matter what, I'm never going to be able to dunk, or certainly not like LeBron, even if I could dunk. And that means that most of my calf is probably slow oxidative fibers, but most of his calf is fast twitch glycolytic fibers. So continuing with the theme of velocity and duration of contraction, we can see the different muscle types are better suited for different jobs. So the fast glycolytic fibers are best for short, intense, or powerful movements like hitting a baseball or a sprint. Responsible for slow oxidative fibers, which are low intensity endurance activities like maintaining posture. So therefore, I want to make sure that I cross off the fast oxidative fibers. So you're not going to be responsible for those. So to use a couple examples over here on the image to the right, this first one is a predominance of fast glycolytic fibers, which fatigue very quickly. But this example would be like the lateral rectus muscle that you learned about earlier. But your eyes, you can get eye strain after a certain amount of time. But we also have other muscles like the gastrocnemius muscle and the soleus muscle. So this would be the calf muscle, which is the gastrocnemius muscle, and this would be the soleus muscle. So they are more of the type of slow oxidative fiber. So we can increase the contractile velocity with the type of fiber or the duration by the predominance of the slow oxidative, which are fatigue resistance. In the case of lifting up an ice cream coat, when you have small load, obviously, and increased recruitment of motor units. This table is showing you an the characteristics of these different extremes. And again, you're not going to be responsible for fast oxidative fibers, so I want to completely cross the middle column off. What's more important to concentrate on are the two differences, like the opposites, compare and contrast these two. So the slow oxidative fiber, it's kind of more like the remember the story of the tortoise and the hare. So the tortoise would be the slow turtle. That turtle would have slow oxidative fibers. The ATPase would be slow. It would use aerobic. The turtle could go for a very long period of time. There's high myoglobin, which transports oxygen, a low amount of glycogen stores. It's recruited first, and the rate of fatigue is slow. It's for endurance activities like a marathon, maintaining posture, so postural muscles of the back like the latissimus dorsi. And the structural characteristics would be small, many mitochondria, because it does metabolize aerobically, many capillaries, and a red color. Whereas the rabbit, the hare, would have fast glycolytic fibers. It has a very fast speed of contraction, fast um, speed of myosin ATPases, but it produces ATP anaerobically. So there's a low amount of myoglobin, high glycogen stores, gets recruited last, and fatigues very quickly. So it would be for short, powerful movements like hitting a baseball. So examples of this would be biceps or muscles that move the eye. The fiber diameter is intermediate. It has very few mitochondria because it's an anaerobic muscle fiber. It has few capillaries and its color is white or pale.